Welcome. So, we are very excited to have you for episode number 56 of Business Unusual. And I have a very special guest today, Donna Gordon, who is a researcher at a level that very few of us would ever care to get to. So, she is the master of going into the weeds on tracking down insights and information that are critically important to us in business for us to make the best decisions. Now, how I met Donna a few years back, she and I have known each other, gosh, it's probably, or known of each other since almost way back in the days of UMKC, SBDTC, and you were working with PTAC. And I mean, it's funny because we were kind of in the same orbit, but we never actually connected until one of my very good friends, and I think he may be on the call today or he was registered, Frank Benura, actually shared with me how he has leveraged Donna's expertise in order to help him be a lot more effective with his prospecting. So I'm just going to kick things off with a little bit of insight about how he leveraged Donna, because she works with everything from independent professionals that have limited time to pursue opportunities, and they need to be very strategic on which prospects actually make it up on their radar, all the way through marketing and ad agencies that need to do a deep, in-depth dive into market analysis to validate whether or not the direction that companies are pursuing is the right one for them. So with that, she comes at it from a lot of different perspectives, but it's all around the topic of research. So since so many of us right now are struggling with understanding whether or not the direction we're going is the right one, I think everybody's kind of doing the pandemic shuffle, and we're all just kind of trying to get our bearings about what we want to go get next, particularly if our market has been dramatically impacted by the pandemic. So what I am excited to have Donna share is just kind of insights at different levels about what we can do with our own research just to validate what we're doing and know that it's in the right direction. So Donna, I'm excited to turn things over to you. Do you want to do just a really quick intro and then we'll dive into the presentation?
Okay, great. Thank you very much for being here and for having me. My research journey started back in 1995 when I took a continuing ed class at UMKC on how to research or how to use the internet. When it was pretty Wild West back then. Primarily my focus at the time, I was working at a business incubator working with startups to use this new tool called the internet to help them do a better job of doing research. And I had gone on from there to financial firms. I was with a financial intermediary firm where we worked with companies to do acquisitions, or if they were looking to bring on an investor, recapitalization, any plan that's going in front of a bank or an investor is going to require a plan with at least some modicum of research. Sure, there's lots of businesses that get launched on gut, and even a few of them end up being successful. But for the most part, when you've got to have a formal document, then the research is an important component to that. Over the last 20 years, I launched my business in 2001, and over the years, obviously, the tools have changed. The Smart Aleck teenage daughter response to me back in about 10 years ago was with, Google, why would anybody hire you, Mom? Because you can Google anything. And so, I laughed, but then I thought, well, really, she's got a point. But I think it's almost gone the other direction from 1995 when everybody said, I don't even know how to find any information, to now people will say, I've been researching for 2 months and I can't make a decision. I've got analysis paralysis, or I've got all this information, but what does it mean? Or how do I know if this information is credible? And so it's really, it's not just about the information, but it's about the insight. And so we'll kind of walk through some of the ways of looking at the information gathering process to make sure that you're getting the information that you need. I've got a really much more longer in-depth presentation on actually how to do research from a more nuts and bolts standpoint. But frankly, it puts a lot of people to sleep. I mean, it's very interesting to me because this is what I enjoy doing. I love learning new things. I love understanding new industries, new concepts. But the process in and of itself is kind of tedious. So
Absolutely.
the idea is that, let's talk about some big picture things, and I'll throw some tips in there as well. So certainly, if I'm not answering any questions that you came here, throw them up there, and we'll hopefully have time to get to everything.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by just talking about what is the difference, information versus insights. So information is what you can get when you go to Google, or you go to DuckDuckGo, or you go to any number of different search engines that are actually out there. But those are all just facts. So the graphic on the left sort of represents all of the different factors that can impact your business. So a fact in and of itself could be that a new law has been put in place, or that your customers are aging, or that there are new technologies that are coming online. So, sorry, I just had someone walk in on me. So all of these different factors can impact your business, but not all are created equal. So for instance, I was working with a company in the printing industry, and in that industry, the competitive environment is very strong, very competitive. It's kind of more of a commodity type of product. So if you're selling something that's not easily differentiated, you're probably going to deal more with competitive factors. If you're in the software industry, obviously technology and the rate of technology change is a factor, or facts around the technology in your industry are going to be more important to you. So all of these factors are playing into your business environment. So kind of understanding all of them, and then which of those that are important is the key to getting the complete picture. Another way of looking at it is the insight is you've got your external environment. So those are the things you can't control. COVID-19 is nothing you can control. But it's still going to impact your business. So what things are going on in your external environment over which you have no control, but yet you as a business person still have to respond to those. Whereas your operating environment is how is your company, or how are you as an individual responding to the external environment. And then part of your operating environment then is, what are your customers thinking? What are your competitors thinking? What are all of these things that are happening in the external environment? How are people around you then responding to that? And so you really need to look at both of those when you look at what insights are going to inform your response.
So this is the real reason why you wouldn't just want to say, how many companies are there in this particular SIC code in this geographic territory? You need to understand the broader picture beyond that when you're putting together your lead list or identifying who you want to pursue. Is that right?
Absolutely. And if you look at it from the standpoint of those are maybe not all created equal. Interestingly, one of the things I had just looked at was in the housing market. They said there's a shortage of 2.5 million homes across the country. But the question then is that 200.5 million divided by 50 states? Are there some markets where there's bigger shortages than others? Is the price point the same? Is the shortage actually related to kind of the entry-level home price versus the upscale or the move-up price? So if you're looking for a home right now in the $250,000 range in the Kansas City market, there's a housing shortage. If you are looking for a newly built home in the $450,000 price range, there's actually quite a few homes on the market that are available in that price range. So you kind of have to look at the overall environment. Also, who's buying those homes? Are they investors? Are they millennials? Are they retiring boomers? Who's in the external environment? Who is out there in the marketplace right now? And then the operating perspective would be, what nuances are there in your particular geographic area? At least in the case of real estate, it's a geography kind of basis. In other industries, it may be, for instance, going back to the printer example. In the printing industry, there are specialized printers, there are long-run printers, there's book printers, there's newspaper printers, there's actually lots of different submarkets within the printing environment. But the external environment of more content is being consumed online versus in print is something in the external environment that all printers are ultimately responding to. But what the insights that inform their response is if you're printing to, say, the promotional products industry, where a lot of those types of things are given away at trade shows and in-person events and those types of things, you're probably printing a lot fewer of them. But if you're a printer of bumper stickers and campaign materials in 2020, you probably had a pretty good year. So all of these things that are affecting the broader industry then also break down into different components within the industry.
Makes sense.
So overall, if you say, I need this particular NAICS code, the other piece of that is the context of, well, what is the pain point within that NAICS code? So if you say you're calling on lawyers, for instance, there's a number of different specialties within the field of law practice. How many other, for instance, if you're an M&A attorney, how many other M&A attorneys are there out there? But there's only so many transactions that happen in any given year. So are the number of transactions rising? M&A kind of went on a pause through the early stage of the pandemic, but now all indications are that it's full speed ahead this year and that there's going to be a lot more transactions. But if there's 25 M&A lawyers in a market that sees 15 to 20 deals a year, obviously that says it's going to be a lot tougher to attract new business because there's a lot more competitors out there in that environment. So even within looking at law firms as a potential target, you want to look at each different area within the law firm space to say which of those are experiencing the most pain in their particular external environment that I can help them solve. So it's part of looking at the external environment of not only your business, but your customers. And so having that data that tells you what message you need to put out there in order to resonate with that particular customer. The more you understand about the world that they're living in, then the more likely you're going to be able to build some kind of rapport with them and or be able to craft a solution that helps them with either their external environment or their response to the external environment.
Awesome. Okay, so let's take just a quick second here and ask for a kind of a poll of our audience. So how many of you are very clear about who your target audience is and you need more information about a particular audience versus, so that's choice number one. You're clear about who your prospect profile is. The second option that I want to hear from is, are you still trying to figure out who the perfect audience is because your target has shifted? And perhaps you've been primarily focused on restaurant and retail, or doing a lot of that example that Donna gave of printing promotional materials and things for trade shows that are no longer taking place. So option one is, you know who they are and you need more information to improve your approach to them, versus number two, you need to figure it out. So chat in and let me know where you're at. Are you number one? Are you number two? Or option A or B? So let's take just a quick second, see if we've got everybody with us. Okay. So it looks like, Donna, a lot of our group is in A with some B mixed in there as well. Okay. So what are we going to do about that?
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about approach. So regardless of whether you know your audience very well or you're still trying to figure out your audience, I always approach a new research project with what I call the research funnel. So you start out very broad. Just as you're in a new place that you've never been before, you're going to be more observant. If you're, for instance, you're driving from your house to the grocery store, a path that you've ridden 50 times in a year at a minimum, you're probably not going to pay that as much attention to the external environment around you, because you're sort of on this autopilot. It's something you've done a million times. There's nothing new. Maybe you might notice that there's somebody painted their house a different color or something, but you're not going to observe as much. Whereas if you are in a new place and you have to get to a new place you've never been before, you're going to be a lot more observant of your surroundings because it's new, it's something that's different. And cognitively, I mean, the science has even said that, a change of scenery opens up our mind to new ideas, new concepts, new things. We will notice new things when we get a new environment. In fact, it was interesting. I actually saw something yesterday that for, those of us that work from home, is to say, change stuff up on your walls, do something, different. If you're indoors, the more you can change your environment around on a regular basis, the more it stimulates your thinking and get kind of beyond what you're looking at. And so with research for me, I always start out very broad. So what are overall trends in the industry? So maybe we're, narrowing down on, say, I think somebody said that they're doing, security and camera services and those types of things. So the broader, environment of that is, who has a building that needs something secured? What are the challenges? What are things going on in building security that are overall different? What did people do 5 or 10 years ago, versus what they're doing now? What sorts of challenges are people running up against? For instance, cameras are ubiquitous, but because people who are doing something they're not supposed to be doing, they're going to look for the cameras, and the first thing they're going to do is take their cameras out. So you want to look for, what are the broader challenges being faced? And maybe you'll run across things and say, well, gosh, that really doesn't apply to me. You want as open a mind as possible to kind of take in the entire landscape of what you're looking for. Over time, and for instance, one of my kind of favorite first steps in the research process is to go to industry publications, industry associations, any sorts of broader industry kinds of resources. And I will say with a caveat that most industry publications are not necessarily independent publications. So for instance, if you advertise in a, Printing Impressions Monthly, there's a pretty good chance that you'll get an opportunity to write an article about your particular company, or some sort of feature about the company. And so again, you want to look at broader trends. So for instance, in manufacturing, you can't hardly pick up a publication in manufacturing that's not talking about the skills gap and the shortage of labor and the demographic changes that are affecting the industry. So even if Industry Week may not be the be all or end all, and the National Association of Manufacturers is saying one thing, and so on and so forth, you want to look at what kinds of things keep coming up over and over again. What sorts of things are recurring themes in kind of a very broad overall base. And so once you feel like you've had a broad look at the overall space, then you want to start trying to narrow this down and saying, okay, how does this apply to me? How does this apply to my clients? How are others responding? So in the broader industry space, for instance, if you find out that there's a lot of consolidation going on in that particular industry, well, what's driving that? Is it a lack of innovation? Typically in mature industries, the next step in the natural progression is that as businesses become mature, they tend to consolidate in order to become more efficient. So are there a lot of tips and information about driving operational efficiencies? That probably is telling you that the industry is not really innovative right now. It's sort of mature. For instance, the cell phone industry would be a perfect example of that. 15 years ago, the smartphone was a new market, and the innovation was happening very quickly. There was a kind of a race to the top in order to try to get cell phones in the hands of everyone. Now it's fairly ubiquitous. It's a much more mature marketplace, and so innovation has gone from kind of being breakthrough to being more incremental. And so, how does that apply if you're looking to enter into, this marketplace now? You've really got to step up your innovation game. So you want to kind of look at these bigger trends and say, how does this apply to my business? If you're, for instance, in the security business, and you're talking about new technology that I don't know, say is able to monitor conditions in real time and provide a dashboard to the building manager, or those types of things. How many other people are going in that general direction? What kinds of responses? What companies are growing quickly versus those that are not? And looking at competitors. Going back again to the printing example, there's companies that are specializing in small business and going for the sticker and label market, and they've been massively successful. Whereas the companies that are doing kind of long run, big publications are struggling. So what is it that's different between the successful firms and the non-successful firms? And if you're looking at a list of prospects to say, which of these within this space are the innovators, the ones that are moving quickly, the ones that are going to be more open. One of the things, you look at kind of the science of decision making, and this is more academic, but I found it to be reasonably true when you're working with companies that are looking to make decisions. When there's a high level of environmental uncertainty, people will tend to go on their gut. Saying of uncertainty in 2020, who knows what we're going to do next. In that case, finding really good information. I mean, sadly, I was working on a project or a client that works in the university space, we were wrapping up a strategic plan for the School of Hospitality at a college in Maryland. And obviously with our final presentation to the client being in April, pretty much all of the assumptions that we had made going into this were totally gone. I mean, it went from how do we deal with the workforce shortage in the hospitality base in Maryland to where are our employees? I mean, there were massive layoffs going on within the industry and in response to the pandemic. And so the question then, the client followed up with us in June and said, well, now, what's going on now that we have that we can plan for the next year? That's a lot tougher than it was 6 months ago, because obviously the environment is constantly changing. And so at the end of the day, we were able to say, here's some overall insights, and here's some things that we're seeing out there. But it really came down to there's just not a whole lot we can tell you with certainty right now. I mean, research and data in a very uncertain market is probably, less valuable than just going with gut. Although the problem with gut is it informed gut, or is it, just I have
instinctive?
So the difference, and the other piece of that then is firm performance, because firms where things are going well, they tend to have a lot more confidence in their decision making versus firms that have struggling. Then they start to second guess themselves and think that maybe having the data and research is more important. But frankly, it's sometimes very large companies that are very successful are the ones who really need it the most, because they can get blindsided. I recall a company that was a specialty. We had done research for a specialty move. They specialized in high value collectibles, so collector cars, collector motorcycles, and they would transport things to car shows and to trade shows and those types of things. And so they were very unique in that marketplace, that they had special expertise as to how to move these things quickly, how to get them to the right place at the right time. They knew all of the trade show rules and which doors they needed to come in and all of that. And so they were very focused on what was going on in the trade show industry and in the car show industry, but they had not paid attention to the fact that UPS had launched a trade show moving division. Now, granted, are they, going to be as proficient as this company with 25 years of industry knowledge? Probably not. But with, the brand name and the national footprint and the ability to bring those vehicles into the marketplace was something that they totally had not seen coming. And so even if you're feeling like you've been successful with gut, it pays to sort of get a second opinion, to sort of look at the data. What am I missing? And that's kind of where it comes down to refining the marketing message. So what gaps are there that you can address? What sorts of things are a new need or an emerging need in the marketplace? A perfect example of that is Jay Rieger started making hand sanitizer last April. Certainly the market for premium liquor did not go anywhere, but and for some people the demand on that actually went up, but it was also Absolutely. A question, well, if people aren't leaving their homes for, they may, they're not going to go and spend an evening out, at their brand new facility with the lovely lounge and the slide and all the rest they had. All of a sudden that was not available to them. And so, yeah, you could go and buy a bottle at curbside, but the immediate need out there was that there was a shortage of hand sanitizer and everybody was interested. And so they were making these gallon jugs of hand sanitizer through the same processes, and they were selling it as fast as they could make it. But obviously, now you can't pass an end cap on a store that doesn't have hand sanitizer. So obviously, you have to continue to monitor and say, is this no longer a gap? I don't think they're probably even selling any hand sanitizer today. And then how does your product or service fit in? So if you're offering a service to the marketplace, or say you're, I think somebody said they were in marketing or a marketing consultant. That's a very kind of a broad space. So how do you drill down? What kind of marketing, what kind of industry expertise are you aware of? I'm doing a project with BioNexus KC in the life science space. There are companies that specialize in just being able to take very complex scientific ideas and communicate them in language that the general public can understand. There's a law firm called Life Science Legal, and they specialize in legal agreements for companies that are just in the life sciences space. So they've taken something that's fairly generic, like legal services, and then they've customized it based on a need in the marketplace, in that, the average garden variety lawyer probably doesn't understand the difference between a small molecule and a large molecule drug. And frankly, I don't either, but I know they're two different things. So if your company is prospecting to a particular industry, what sorts of lingo, what sorts of terminology, how can you help make them more approachable? Or how can you do a better job of selling by understanding what's going on in the particulars of your marketplace? I was the manager of the Kansas City Manufacturing Network for 11 years. And interestingly, we had a lot of bankers that came to those meetings. And at first it would baffle me because, frankly, the Kansas City Manufacturers Network was very operationally focused. We talked a lot about lean. We talked about process improvement. We talked about quality control. We talked about a lot of the nuts and bolts issues at our meetings that have nothing to do with banking. And, frankly, most of the time, the CFOs who make the banking decisions within manufacturing companies, they weren't even at the meeting. And so, I finally asked one of the bankers who'd been coming pretty regularly to these meetings, and I said, so what is it that keeps you coming back? And his response was, I can now walk into my manufacturing clients and say, hey, by the way, I heard that this other company has got a new, since I want to talk about the preventive maintenance system that they were using at Millbank Manufacturing at the time. They had hosted a plant tour. They had come up with this really easy, color-coded, simple to comply with about getting all their preventive maintenance done. And there was probably a half a dozen companies that left that plant tour and went back to their plant and said, hey, we're gonna adopt this system. We're gonna put this in our plant. This really works well. And so they were able to actually add value to their customers by coming in and saying, there's different ways that you could look at if PM is one of your problems. Because most bankers have a background in finance. They probably don't know a whole lot about lean manufacturing. They don't know about ISO standards. I mean, they may read about some of these things, but having that ability to kind of go out and observe and learn some new things that they could turn around then and share those insights with their client, or even to say, hey, SOR and Linux, and maybe you need to talk to the folks out at Millbank about, what they're doing here, and make those kinds of connections. And that helps cement your value in the mind of your customers. So kind of understanding more about the specifics of the companies that you're talking to then helps you not only add value, but then also become more of a trusted partner in their network. So again, looking for just refining that market and message. What kinds of changes are you seeing? What kinds of products? What kind of messaging Looking at the messaging out there. For instance, there's a commercial that's been running on the radio station I listen to that's saying you want your neighbors to know that you care about having the best lawn. And so basically what they're saying is, if you hire us, then you're telling your neighbors that you are a quality lawn person and you care about the quality of your lawn. So they're basically speaking to people to say, if you want to keep up with the Joneses, you better hire us. So their customers are, and they're probably more expensive than, the Joe teenager down the street. You can hire him for $35 to mow your front yard. Or, do you want to hire the professional that tells your neighbors that you care? So it's all kind of speaking to not just, if you're in the lawn mowing business, then your customer base is anyone with a lawn. So, are you just going to knock on every door and say, hey, I can mow your yard? Or do you want to talk to a specific segment of that lawn business? Because you're probably going to be more successful. If you're a premium company charging a premium service, then you want to talk in a language that people who are willing to pay a premium want to hear the language.
So these are wonderful questions, Donna. Would it be okay with you if we share this slide deck with our folks that are on the call? Because I think that you pretty much have kind of if you just looked at these questions right here, that's worth the price of admission for today, just as far as helping to understand what the research is. And I know the research process is, and I know you've got a ton more information to cover. I just want to keep us on track as far as time is concerned also. So if we can make this available, they'll be able to dive deeper into these questions. And that will be, I think, just a great asset to everybody joining us.
And again, I think, really the key to understanding the context is being able to ask the right questions. And so I think a lot of times we get focused, and I'm guilty of this as well, is my product or service is research, but I'm not selling the research as much as I'm selling insight, that I'm selling understanding, and I'm understanding a competitive advantage. So for instance, if you're selling cleaning products, you're not really selling cleaning products. You're selling peace of mind for people that are worried about germs. Or maybe if you're an accounting services, you say, I need to get a better handle on my money. There's a business in Lee Summit that provides accounting and bookkeeping services that's called Where Your Money Went. I mean, I love the name of that company because, again, accounting and bookkeeping services, that's kind of a commodity. But her specialty is working with small businesses who say, where did my money go? And that's, common in rapidly growing and smaller businesses. A lot of times you get very focused on serving your customers. You get focused on making sure that the lights stay on and you're doing all of the right things to serve your customers. And then you look down and your checkbook's empty. And so, where did my money go? So, when somebody gets up and says, I'm with a bookkeeping services, where your money went, I can help you figure out where your money went. Well, she's speaking to people who say, I need to get a better handle on my money. Graphics and print services, going back to the print industry example again, there's a company in Wisconsin called Romo Durable Graphics, and they are a printer that only deals with printing things that are going to get beat up outdoors. So they'll put they do the logo and the graphics for outboard motors for boats, jet skis, bicycles, bicycle helmets, anything that's outdoors that takes a beating. They have better technology to make sure that your graphic stays on the product, that it stays looking nice, that all of your industry, all of your efforts to put a superior product together for the industry is all for naught if your graphic or your label falls off within a week of the customer buying the product or whatever. And so they have, every video ends with, we believe the art on the outside reflects everything about the art on the inside. So if you're looking to, come out with a very, commodity type of product, or you're, putting, a label on a beer that's going to get drank, then you want to make sure that that label doesn't peel off when you put the beer in the cooler. So if you wanted to reflect quality on the outside, if you put a lot of time and effort into the quality of your product, then you better make sure your logo reflects that same quality. And so they don't even call themselves a printing company. They say they're a branding company. So they're basically doing the same thing other companies are doing, but they're approaching it from the standpoint of saying, we've got a lab in-house that will make sure that your logo and your graphics stay on and that they look good even in the worst environments. So you can take something that's very generic, but then you can turn that and say, what is it I'm really selling? And that, again, goes back to research. So if you're looking to focus on rapidly growing small businesses, then you want to look at what sorts of challenges are they facing. If you look at, for instance, SBA data that says, 60% of businesses have cash flow problems, or something along those particular lines, you can use those insights to then use to tailor your message to respond to the concerns that you're seeing with your customers.
And
so
we did do another episode on this too, that I will share the link for on Monday, that Susan Spalding was our presenter on that one. And she walked us through interviewing your audience and understanding, just at a deeper dive, what Donna's talking about here as far as getting to what you're really selling. She did a phenomenal job of kind of taking a little bit of a different perspective. And Donna and Susan work a lot together on projects as well. So I think you'd get a lot of benefit out of that one also.
Well, and I will say too, with Susan's approach is kind of the more high touch, personal approach of really getting down and understanding the psychographics and the very specific things that are driving your customers. Whereas, that's why Susan and I work together well, because I'll look at the broader external environment and what things are what kinds of time pressures are people with school-aged children facing right now when they're trying to do these things and those types of things. Whereas Susan's perspective is to come in and say, okay, let's bring 15 moms in and talk to them about what they're facing and what's going on. And you really kind of have to have both of those views if you really want to get a full and complete picture. Because even if you have 15 people that are 100% honest in your room, people don't always necessarily know what's driving their behavior. They may think they know what's driving their behavior, but that kind of goes back to then the next phase of what we were going to talk about is what sorts of mistakes can you make when you're out there looking for research insights. So, for instance, context. If you don't ask the right questions, then you're not going to be able to define the context. So at the very beginning, kind of knowing what kind of questions you want to ask is really important. And context is kind of a multi-level thing again, because it goes back to, for instance, with the firm size. Large firms tend to have, if you're selling to large firms, you need to take the context that they tend to have specialties. So, for instance, they may have a specific department that looks at marketing, but maybe so they may have a specialized marketing department, and so anytime they have a marketing question, they're going to go back to their marketing department. But the reality is that maybe there's a gap in there. Maybe they don't really have anybody that knows how to do SEO, or obviously that's kind of a de rigueur thing now for marketing, but What sorts of gaps are they going to identify? They're probably not going to, just because they tend to feel like they've got specialization covered. And so you want to be able to look at where the context of the questions you're asking, what sorts of things are going to influence that decision or not. Googling it. Again, going back to, if you can Google it, why do you need to go anywhere else? There's several different kind of thoughts around. One, Google's algorithm is sort of set up to say, if Google notices that you're searching in a particular area quite a bit, they will then tailor those search results based on your previous searches. So you may not even be getting the best information you need, especially if you're looking for an outsider perspective. So it's important to kind of look at not only other search engines, but also, a variety of search terms, kind of going back to the cell phone again. Is it a cell phone? Is it a mobile phone? Is it a smartphone? Is it an iPod or an iPod? I mean, not an iPod. An iPhone. I'm dating myself with that one. So using the same word or using a different term around the same thing will get you some very different results. A lot of times when I'm, getting kind of new into an industry, I'll just start jotting down a number of terms that get thrown out. Every industry's kind of got their own acronyms. So having some different keywords where you're asking the same question but using different words to ask it are going to get you completely different search results.
Makes
taking
sense.
some distance. And taking distance. And a lot of times you will run across something new and interesting, and you really dive into that and you think, okay, this is a new direction that I want to go. Sometimes it makes sense to then set it aside, go back, and when you talk about, key steps to good decision making, one of the, over and over again, when you hear about, bad decisions being made, a lot of times it's because they're rushed. And so when I'm learning some new things, I tend to, dig in pretty deeply, spend 4, 5, 6 hours, and then kind of just step away from it for a while. Move on to a different project, go out and dig in the dirt, whatever it is. Take some time before you process what that new information is, because once you have that distance, you start to achieve some perspective to say, okay, maybe that's not so revolutionary after all, and maybe there's another competitor that I need to look into. So there's a lot of desire, I think, sometimes to get a quick answer, but typically I would say, if the answer comes too quickly, put some distance behind it and see if it still makes sense to you the next day.
So Donna, how often do you find out that many of us are capturing data based on what we want to see versus what we actually need to see?
And that kind of goes to my next biggest mistakes people make in research is confirmation bias. I presume probably everybody's heard of that term, but there's
especially with our last election.
Right, because,
and saw that.
And frankly, I mean, even with any hot button issue of the day, I'm almost afraid to even say this word, but vaccine. There's people that believe that the vaccine is a dangerous thing. They're going to gravitate towards articles that confirm the danger, whereas people who say, we have to be 100% behind this, they're going to gravitate towards things that say what they believe. So with business owner, I mean, it's really no different with a business situation. When somebody is starting up a business, they are generally I mean, nobody goes into business with a thought that, well, gosh, I'm probably going to be out of business in a year. I mean, you don't jump into entrepreneurship and business ownership without having a lot of overriding faith in that your product or service is something that's truly needed in the marketplace. But the challenge of that then is every time you see an article that confirms you're successful, that your business is going to be successful, you tack that up and say, see, I told you. Whereas you may see something that pokes some holes in what you're looking for, and you're going to discount that immediately just because it doesn't fit with your overall view of where you think the marketplace is taking you. So the key is to have obviously you want an optimistic outlook, or you wouldn't be in business in the first place. But you also want to come back and say, okay, what's wrong with this picture? What's missing? What sorts of risks are out there? I've not done this in a while, but when I was working with businesses who are raising capital, probably the number one complaint from investors is they don't do a good enough job of outlining what are the risks are. What are the downsides? When somebody comes up to you and says there is no downside to this, you need to run, because everything involves trade-offs and choices. And so there's truly no risk-free. I mean, I guess in finance, they'll say that the treasury bond is the risk-free rate. But anyway, I mean, there's very little that you can call risk-free without looking like you haven't done your homework.
Absolutely. So Donna, it looks like we've got about 3 minutes left. And one of the things that I know many folks in our audiences did want to dive into is, what are some of the steps that you think are the most important for people to take in getting access to this information now? Can I have you kind of jump to the end?
I apologize. I was not watching the clock. So as far as avoiding bias is, number one, widen your options. If you feel like you have a choice of A or B, go out and look for C. So look for as many options as possible, not just whether or not, but what 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 choices are out there. Reality testing your assumptions. And a lot of times this makes a lot of sense when you look at it from the standpoint of getting an outsider perspective. I know we talk a lot about diversity in today's environment, but there's a lot more to diversity than just making sure you've checked the right boxes. The reality is that, if you ask a question like, what's the best show on television right now, you're going to get a very different answer from your 5-year-old than you are from your grandmother. And so when you're making decisions, when you're looking at marketplaces, make sure that you have people that are trusted advisors, employees, that have a very diverse view of whatever the situation is, to help reality test your assumptions. So in other words, don't go off and do research and then make a decision. Throw that research out in front of people and say, what am I missing here? What's the negatives? What's the positives? Going back to, I just talked about attaining the distance. If you're making a major decision, there needs to be some distance between the time that you've got the information and the time you actually use to make the decision. Think like a scientist. There was actually a study done where they worked with a group of companies where they gave them kind of some guidelines on business planning and strategic planning, and then said, okay, go off and do these things. And then the other half, they said, okay, we want you to take your business plan and think like a scientist and say, my premise for my business is a hypothesis. Then go out and talk to people and say, this is my hypothesis. What's true about this and what's false. And the group that came at it with this, I've got a hypothesis, give me some feedback, were 50% more, had 50% higher growth than the companies that did not do that. And so this was in Germany, but I think, you know, it applies probably in any environment when you're taking your premise and saying, instead of saying this is written in stone, this is my hypothesis. And then, you know, my general rule of three is you always want to have at least three sources that convey the same conclusion if you're going to be making a key decision. So it's easy to run across and say, you know, oh gosh, Gartner says this industry is going to grow by 30% next year. If that's going to be the basis for your ramping up your operation for the next year, you probably should look at least two other resources to make sure that that data is consistent across multiple sources.
Fantastic.
And just real quickly, on a practical basis, as you're doing a search, always jot notes down on paper. You know, what words are you looking? What things worked for you using multiple search engines? There's a website called socialsearcher.com that you can put in keywords and it'll tell you all the chatter that's going on in social media around your topic. That's a really good way to kind of get an outside perspective on what if you're thinking your business is going in a particular direction, go on socialsearcher.com and put in some keywords and see if everybody else on social media is agreeing with you. There's a free version that you can do some real basic stuff, or they've got a paid version if you want to really nerd out on it. And get a library card. There's a number of good research databases that are available through the library. You just got to have a library card.
Fantastic.
So, thank you.
All right, Donna, you have given us some great information. If you'd advance one more slide, we have contact info for you to reach out if you have any questions about the content that was covered today. We did go deep on a few different points as far as understanding what you need to know. If you've got questions about resources and what different search engines make sense, you know, feel free to chat that to us also. And one of the things that I will ask Donna and that I will include with the email that goes out Monday is kind of some of her favorite search engines and some of the different tools that she uses. And I will share those as well with you. So I will wrap us up and just say thank you so much to Donna for giving us this great information. I was taking notes like mad, and I'm pretty excited about diving into some of the research that I've got coming up. And also, I know that I've got several clients that are going to absolutely love this information that was presented here today. So, okay, let me just check and see if we have any questions as well. Before we get wrapped up. So it looks as if there are a lot of folks saying thank you so much for the information and insight that was shared, which is kind of my perspective as well. I really appreciate you taking time with us today to cover this very important topic for so many of us. So I will wrap us all up and wish everybody an absolutely wonderful weekend and good selling in your prospecting effort, folks. Take care.
Thank you.